300 guests held their breath. The bride froze mid-aisle, her eyes locked on the service window. "What is that girl doing here?" she hissed. Whispers rippled. Phones came out. And then the groom said one word that stopped everything. "Stop." But long before that shocking moment at the altar, the mansion itself told another story. One built on fear, cruelty, and a maid who refused to break. Before we jump in, tell me in the comments. Have you ever loved someone so deeply, hoping your love would soften them, only to find out they never changed? In a world that often chases outward beauty and forgets the kind that lives in kindness and humility, Eloan Merrick, the first daughter of Amos Winterbourne and the eldest of 8 children, chose a different path. Her idea of beauty was not in polished looks or wealth, but in the strength that comes from years of pain, struggle, and sacrifice. She believed real love was intentional, and that with it, any burden could be carried. But everyone knew a hard truth. When a person builds life only on shallow beauty, they invite endless trouble and will suffer deeply for it. That truth was waiting for Cullen Westbrook, a billionaire with the world at his feet but blind in his choices of love. It was into the home of Sable Pennington, Cullen's fiancée, a woman so cruel no maid had lasted more than 4 months under her roof, that Eloan quietly walked in, carrying nothing but her determination and her unshakable spirit. The Westbrook estate sat like a crown jewel on the hills of Beverly Heights, California, its marble columns gleaming under the autumn sun. Inside, however, the atmosphere was anything but golden. The staff quarters buzzed with whispered conversations and nervous glances as another resignation letter was quietly filed away. "That's 9 maids in 6 months, Mrs. Adelaide Foster, the head housekeeper, muttered to herself as she reviewed the latest departure. Patricia Coleman had lasted exactly 3 weeks before packing her bags at midnight, leaving behind only a brief note, "I cannot endure another day." The source of this domestic chaos was no mystery to anyone who worked within those pristine walls. Sable Pennington, 25 years old and stunningly beautiful with her cascading blonde hair and emerald eyes, possessed a cruelty that seemed to grow more refined with each passing day. As the fiancée of 32-year-old Cullen Westbrook, heir to a tech empire worth $12 billion, she wielded her future position like a weapon. "Mrs. Foster," Sable's voice rang through the mansion's intercom system, sharp as broken crystal. "Send up the new girl immediately. I want to see what mediocrity we're dealing with this time." Eloan Merrick stood in the marble foyer, her weathered nylon bag clutched tightly in her calloused hands. At 23, she carried herself with a quiet dignity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and her brown eyes held a depth that suggested she had seen more of life's harsh realities than most people twice her age. "Miss Merrick," Mrs. Foster approached with a mixture of sympathy and resignation, "I feel obligated to warn you about Miss Pennington's expectations. She can be quite demanding." Eloan nodded slowly. "Mrs. Foster, I didn't come here looking for easy. My mother is in the final stages of kidney disease, and my 7 younger siblings depend on the salary this position offers. Whatever Miss Pennington requires, I'll manage." The head housekeeper studied the young woman's face. Something in those steady brown eyes suggested this one might be different. "Very well. Follow me." As they climbed the grand staircase, Mrs. Foster couldn't help but share what had happened to the previous maids. Rebecca Chin lasted 2 months before Miss Pennington made her scrub the same bathroom 6 times in one afternoon. Jennifer Walsh quit after being forced to reorganize the walk-in closet 4 times in a single week. And poor Patricia Coleman? Well, let's just say Miss Pennington has a talent for finding a person's breaking point. Eloan listened without comment, her expression remaining calm. She had made herself a promise during the 3-hour bus ride from her hometown of Cedar Falls. No matter what happened within these walls, she would not run. Her family's survival depended on her strength. They arrived at Sable's suite, a lavish space decorated in white and gold that probably cost more than most people's homes. Sable sat at her vanity, examining her reflection with the satisfaction of someone who had never questioned her own perfection. "So you're the latest sacrifice," Sable said without turning around. "Tell me, how long do you think you'll last?" "I'm keeping a betting pool with my friends." "I intend to fulfill my contract, Miss Pennington," Eloan replied evenly. Sable turned, her green eyes gleaming with amusement. "How refreshing. They always start so confident." She stood and circled Eloan like a predator studying prey. "Let me be clear about something. I don't want friends among the staff. I don't want understanding or sympathy. I want perfection, and when I don't get it, there are consequences. I understand, Mississippi. Do you?" Sable picked up a crystal vase filled with fresh roses and deliberately dropped it. The crash echoed through the room as water and glass scattered across the marble floor. "Clean it up. Now." As Eloan knelt to gather the broken pieces, Sable continued her verbal assault. "You know what your problem is going to be? You look like the type who thinks hard work and good intentions matter. Let me save you some time, they don't. Not here. Not in my world." Eloan worked silently, carefully collecting each shard of crystal while Sable paced around her, delivering insults designed to break her spirit before the first day was even over. From the doorway, unnoticed by both women, Cullen Westbrook observed the scene. He had returned early from his business meeting in New York, eager to finalize some wedding details with his fiancée. Instead, he found himself watching a woman he'd never seen before endure humiliation with a grace that left him unexpectedly moved. The days that followed established a pattern that would have broken most people within a week. Sable seemed to view Eloan's presence as a personal challenge, an opportunity to perfect her craft of psychological torment. It started with the uniforms. Every morning, Eloan would arrive to find her freshly pressed black dress and white apron mysteriously stained with coffee or torn at the seams. While other staff members whispered their sympathy, Eloan simply mended the tears and removed the stains without complaint. "Did you see what she did to the new girl's uniform again?" whispered Carmen Rodriguez, the evening shift cleaner, to her colleague Thomas Mitchell. "That woman has ice water in her veins," Thomas replied, shaking his head. "But you know what? This Eloan girl, she's different. She doesn't cry, doesn't fight back, doesn't even look angry." The wine incident occurred on Eloan's 6th day. Sable had specifically requested her morning coffee be served in the sunroom, along with fresh pastries and the morning newspapers. As Eloan carefully arranged everything on the antique silver tray, Sable appeared behind her. "You're moving too slowly," Sable declared, then deliberately knocked the coffee pot from Eloan's hands. The scalding liquid splashed across Eloan's arm and the pristine white furniture. "Oh dear," Sable said with mock concern, "what a clumsy girl you are. I suppose you'll need to replace that cushion fabric. It's Italian silk, custom made. About $3,000 if I remember correctly." Eloan pressed her lips together as the burn throbbed on her skin, but her voice remained steady. "I'll take care of it immediately, Miss Pennington. And clean this mess up before it stains the marble. I'm having lunch guests in an hour." As Eloan worked to clean the spill, Sable delivered her cruelest blow yet. "You know what I find fascinating about people like you? You actually believe this martyrdom act means something. But here's the truth, you're disposable. When I'm done amusing myself, you'll leave just like all the others, and no one will remember you were ever here." From his study window, Cullen watched Eloan tend to the burn on her arm with simple first aid supplies, never once allowing her composure to crack. Something about her quiet strength stirred an emotion he hadn't felt in years: respect. The slapping incident came during the second week. Sable had demanded that her bedroom be reorganized completely, with every book, decoration, and piece of furniture moved to new positions. After Eloan spent 6 hours completing the task, Sable took one look and declared it absolutely wrong. "Are you deliberately trying to make my space look like a bargain store?" Sable's voice rose to a near shriek. "How dare you take such liberties with my personal belongings?" The slap came so quickly that even Sable seemed surprised by her own action. The sound echoed through the bedroom, followed by a silence so complete you could hear the antique clock ticking on the mantelpiece. Eloan's cheek burned red, but she simply straightened her shoulders and asked, "How would you like it arranged, Miss Pennington?" The staff who witnessed this moment would talk about it for months afterward. Carmen Rodriguez later told her husband, "I've never seen anything like it. This girl has something inside her that can't be broken. It's like watching someone made of steel covered in silk." Even Mrs. Foster, who had seen countless maids come and go, found herself genuinely impressed. "In 40 years of domestic service," she confided to Thomas Mitchell, "I've never met anyone with such inner strength. That young woman is made of something different." But it was Cullen's reaction that mattered most. He had been passing by when he heard the slap, and the sound stopped him cold. Through the partially open door, he watched his fiancée's cruelty and Eloan's dignified response, and something fundamental shifted inside him. "This one is different," he murmured to himself, the words carrying more weight than he yet understood. The uniform sabotage escalated during the third week. Sable began having Eloan's dresses accidentally ruined with bleach, wine, and once, memorably, with chocolate sauce that somehow found its way onto every piece of her work clothing. "I'm so sorry," Sable would say with exaggerated sweetness. "I just can't seem to keep track of where I'm setting things down. You'll need to purchase new uniforms, of course. I can't have my staff looking unprofessional." When Eloan appeared for work in the same mended, stained uniform for the fourth consecutive day, Mrs. Foster quietly slipped her money for new clothing. But Sable discovered this act of kindness and put an immediate stop to it. "Mrs. Foster," she announced coldly, "I'll handle my staff's wardrobe issues myself. From now on, any assistance provided to the help must be approved by me personally." The message was clear. Eloan was to endure alone. Yet through every humiliation, every calculated cruelty, every moment designed to break her spirit, Eloan remained unbroken. She developed a reputation among the staff that bordered on legend. Carmen Rodriguez started calling her the unbreakable girl. Thomas Mitchell began timing how long she could work without showing frustration. His record count reached 8 hours of continuous abuse without a single complaint. And Cullen Westbrook, watching from his study windows and doorways, began to see something in this quiet maid that his flashy fiancée had never possessed. Genuine strength, authentic grace, and a kind of beauty that came from within. The wedding preparations began in earnest during Eloan's 4th week at the mansion. Sable approached the planning with the same calculating intensity she applied to everything else, but with a notable lack of genuine enthusiasm. She seemed more interested in the event as a display of power than as a celebration of love. "I want everything perfect," she announced to the gathered staff, including 3 wedding planners who looked increasingly nervous with each demand. "The flowers must be white peonies, not roses. Roses are common. The champagne will be Dom Perignon 1996, nothing newer. And the guest list better include every important name in Beverly Hills, or heads will roll." Eloan found herself unexpectedly drawn into these preparations when Sable made a surprising announcement. "Since none of these so-called professionals seem capable of understanding my vision," Sable declared after dismissing her 3rd wedding planner, "I'll require additional assistance from the household staff. You," she pointed at Eloan, We'll help coordinate the remaining details. It was clearly intended as another form of torment, adding wedding planning to Alohan's already overwhelming list of daily duties. But for Cullen, it presented an opportunity he hadn't expected. Their first real conversation occurred in the mansion's library, where Alohan was researching venue options per Sable's impossible demands. She needed a location that was exclusive but not pretentious, elegant but not stuffy, impressive but not ostentatious. Requirements that seemed designed to be contradictory. "You look like you're trying to solve quantum physics," Cullen's voice came from behind her. Alohan turned, startled. She had been so focused on her task that she hadn't heard him enter. "Mr. Westbrook, I apologize. Miss Pennington asked me to research venues and I was just—" "Please don't apologize." Cullen moved closer, genuinely curious about what she had found. "What's the impossible standard this time?" For a moment, Alohan hesitated. Speaking honestly about Sable's demands felt like dangerous territory. But something in Cullen's tone suggested genuine interest, not a trap. "She wants a venue that's simultaneously intimate and grand, traditional yet modern, accessible but exclusive," Alohan said carefully. "I'm starting to think she wants me to invent a new location." Cullen laughed, actually laughed, for the first time in months. "You know what? I think you might be right." He pulled up a chair beside her. "Mind if I help? After all, it is my wedding too." They spent the next 2 hours going through venue options, and Cullen found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Alohan had a way of cutting through pretense to practical solutions, but she did it with such gentle humor that even criticism sounded kind. "The Sunset Plaza Hotel has beautiful grounds," she noted, "but the ballroom feels like it was designed by someone who thought more gold was always the right answer." "You just described half the venues in Beverly Hills," Cullen replied, grinning. "The other half apparently went with more crystals," Alohan added dryly. It was such a small moment of shared humor, but it created a crack in the wall Cullen had built around his heart. Here was someone who could make him smile without trying, who could find lightness even in the midst of difficulty. The dress selection process revealed even more about Alohan's character. Sable had narrowed her choices down to 3 gowns, each costing more than most people's cars, but couldn't decide between them. "I need an objective opinion," she announced, "from someone with absolutely no stake in looking good at my wedding." Again, it was clearly meant as an insult, but Alohan approached the task with the same thoughtful care she brought to everything else. "The Valentino is stunning," she said honestly, "and the beadwork is incredible. But when you move in it, the weight seems to pull down your posture slightly." Sable frowned, looking at herself in the mirror more critically. "The Vera Wang is more comfortable," Alohan continued, "and the silhouette is absolutely perfect for your figure. But the train might be difficult to manage during the ceremony." "And the third?" Cullen asked. He had joined them when he heard the discussion, curious about Alohan's perspective. "The custom Marchesa," Alohan paused, choosing her words carefully, "is probably the most beautiful dress I've ever seen. It looks like it was designed specifically for Miss Pennington's coloring and frame. When she wears it, she looks like, well, like a fairy tale." It was such a genuinely kind assessment that even Sable seemed momentarily taken aback. But more importantly, Cullen watched Alohan's face as she spoke and saw nothing but honest appreciation for beauty, even in someone who had treated her terribly. The venue selection trip became the turning point neither of them expected. Sable had decided to visit the top 3 locations in person, and she commanded Alohan to accompany them to take notes and handle logistics. At the first venue, the Beverly Hills Country Club, Sable spent most of her time complaining about minor details while posing for photos her assistant took for social media. Meanwhile, Cullen found himself drawn into conversation with Eloan about the practical aspects of hosting 300 guests. The kitchen facilities are impressive, she noted, and the staff seems experienced with events this size. But the acoustics in the main ballroom might be challenging if you're planning speeches. Good point, Cullen said, genuinely impressed by her attention to detail. What would you suggest? Maybe request a sound check during a busy time? See how the space handles conversation and music together. It was such practical wisdom, delivered without any attempt to impress, and Cullen found himself valuing her input more than the expensive wedding planner's elaborate presentations. At the second venue, Chateau Marmont's private event space, something shifted between them. While Sable critiqued the decor and demanded changes that would cost thousands of dollars, Cullen and Eloan found themselves standing on the terrace, looking out over the city lights. It's beautiful, Eloan said softly, but it feels like it's trying too hard to be impressive. What do you mean? Cullen asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. Well, Eloan hesitated, then continued, a wedding should feel like home, shouldn't it? Somewhere you'd want to remember being. This feels like a stage set. Cullen looked around with new eyes and realized she was absolutely right. Everything was perfect, polished, and completely impersonal. What would feel like home to you? He asked before he could stop himself. Eloan's smile was soft and distant. Somewhere with natural light and room for people to actually talk to each other. Maybe with gardens where kids could play safely while adults celebrated. A place that felt happy before the party even started. It was such a simple, heartfelt vision, and so completely different from the elaborate spectacle Sable was orchestrating, that Cullen felt something crack open in his chest. This was what he wanted. This kind of warmth, this genuine appreciation for simple beauty. That sounds perfect, he said quietly, and meant it. By the time they reached the third venue, the tension between Cullen's growing connection with Eloan and his obligation to Sable had become almost unbearable. At the garden estate in Malibu, with its natural beauty and intimate spaces, Eloan's face lit up in a way that transformed her completely. This is it, she breathed, watching the sunset paint the garden in golden light. This is what a wedding should feel like. Cullen watched her expression and realized he was falling in love with someone who would never be his bride. The recognition hit him like a physical blow. This quiet, strong, genuinely beautiful woman was everything he had never known he wanted, and she was completely beyond his reach. But in that golden moment, watching her smile at the simple beauty of flowers and sunlight, he allowed himself to imagine what it might feel like to marry someone who understood that love was about creating home together, not staging a performance for the world. The shift in Cullen's feelings didn't go unnoticed by Sable, whose instincts for detecting threats to her position were finely tuned. She began watching her fiancé more closely, and what she saw during the wedding planning process set off every alarm bell she possessed. The morning after their venue visits, Sable summoned Eloan to her suite with barely contained fury. I noticed you had quite a few opinions yesterday, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. Tell me, when did I ask for your personal preferences about my wedding? I apologize if I overstepped, Miss Pennington, Eloan replied calmly. I was only trying to provide the objective observations you requested. Objective. Sable laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. There was nothing objective about the way you looked at that garden venue. Or the way my fiancé looked at you looking at it. The accusation hung in the air like a threat. Eloan met Sable's green eyes steadily, refusing to be intimidated. I have no inappropriate interest in Mr. Westbrook, she said clearly. I'm here to work, nothing more. Good, Sable said, stepping closer. Because I'd hate for you to forget your place. You're the help, darling. Replaceable, forgettable, and utterly beneath notice. I'd remember that if I were you. But Sable's threats only made her more determined to establish her dominance. She began engineering situations designed to humiliate Aloan in front of Cullen, hoping to shatter whatever spell the maid had inadvertently cast. The dinner party incident was her first major assault. Sable had invited 12 of Beverly Hills' most influential couples for an engagement celebration, and she specifically assigned Aloan to serve the meal. "I want you to understand," she told Aloan beforehand, "these people represent everything you'll never be. Watch how they move, how they speak, how they belong in ways you never will." But the evening didn't unfold as Sable planned. As Aloan served each course with quiet efficiency, the guests began to notice her grace and unobtrusive competence. Mrs. Catherine Sterling, wife of a prominent banker, even complimented Cullen on his exceptional staff. "Your maid is remarkably professional," she noted. "So hard to find good help these days." Sable's smile grew sharp. "Oh yes, Aloan is quite the find. She's so dedicated that she even takes notes during our wedding planning. Isn't that sweet?" The comment was designed to remind everyone of Aloan's servant status, but it backfired when Mr. Jonathan Pierce, a respected judge, responded approvingly. "Smart thinking," he said to Cullen. "Always good to have detailed records of important events." As the evening progressed, Sable watched in growing fury as Aloan's quiet competence continued to earn respect rather than the dismissal she had orchestrated. The final blow came when Aloan gracefully prevented a wine glass from falling off the table, earning grateful smiles from the guests she had saved from embarrassment. After the guests left, Sable's mask of civility finally cracked. "You think you're so clever?" she hissed at Aloan as they cleaned up. "Playing the perfect little servant, making me look bad in front of my friends." "I was simply doing my job, Miss Pennington," Aloan replied, continuing to clear dishes. "Your job is to stay invisible." Sable's voice rose dangerously. "Your job is to do what you're told and disappear. It is not to charm my guests or make yourself indispensable around here." From the doorway of his study, Cullen heard every word. He had come to thank the staff for their excellent work during the dinner party, but instead found himself witnessing another example of his fiancée's cruelty. The contrast between Sable's vicious anger and Aloan's calm dignity was stark and deeply troubling. The final straw came 3 days before the wedding. Sable had been growing increasingly paranoid about Cullen's feelings, and she decided to eliminate what she saw as the source of the problem. She cornered Aloan in the laundry room, away from potential witnesses. "I've been thinking," she said with false sweetness, "and I've realized you've been working too hard. All this wedding stress must be exhausting for someone of your background." "I'm fine, Miss Pennington," Aloan replied, continuing to fold linens. "Oh, but I insist. In fact, I think you should take a little vacation. A permanent one." Aloan looked up, finally understanding. "You're firing me." "I'm freeing you," Sable corrected, her smile razor sharp. "Freeing you to find a position more suitable to your abilities. Somewhere far from here. I'll even provide a reference. Though I'm afraid I'll have to be honest about your tendency to overstep boundaries." It was a death blow to any future employment prospects, and they both knew it. In the domestic service world, a bad reference from someone like Sable Pennington would make Aloan unemployable in any decent household. "I see," Aloan said quietly. "When would you like me to leave?" "Tonight would be perfect. I'll have Mrs. Foster prepare your final wages." But this conversation too was overheard. Cullen had been looking for Aloan to discuss final details for the wedding ceremony, ironically, to ask her opinion about the music selections. Instead, he heard his fiancée deliberately destroying an innocent woman's livelihood out of petty jealousy. Standing in that hallway listening to Sable's casual cruelty, Cullen finally understood what his life would become if he went through with this marriage. He saw years of watching Sable destroy anyone who threatened her sense of superiority, years of being complicit in her cruelty through his silence. And he realized that somewhere along the way, he had fallen completely in love with a woman whose quiet strength and genuine kindness represented everything he wanted in a partner. Everything Sable could never be. The engagement had become a trap, but in 2 days he would either escape it or lock himself inside forever. The morning of October 15th dawned crisp and clear over Beverly Hills, perfect weather for what was being called the wedding of the season. The garden estate in Malibu had been transformed into something from a fairy tale, with white peonies and cascading greenery creating an atmosphere of elegant romance. 300 guests arrived throughout the morning, filling the garden with the rustle of designer gowns and the murmur of polite conversation. The guest list read like a who's who of California society. Tech moguls, entertainment executives, political figures, and old money families whose names graced hospital wings and university buildings. In the bridal preparation area, Sable was holding court like a queen, surrounded by hairstylists, makeup artists, and photographers capturing every moment for the society pages. She wore the custom Marchesa gown Aloan had admired, and she looked absolutely stunning, a vision of conventional bridal perfection. "Make sure you get my good side," she commanded the photographer, then laughed at her own joke. "Actually, every side is my good side." Her bridesmaids, 6 perfectly polished women who served more as accessories than friends, laughed appreciatively at everything she said. None of them mentioned that the woman who had helped select the dress, the flowers, and even the ceremony timing was notably absent from the celebration. Aloan should have been on a bus back to Cedar Falls by now. She should have been miles away from this place that had been both her salvation and her torment. But Mrs. Foster, bless her heart, had quietly delayed processing the dismissal paperwork until after the wedding. "Just in case," the head housekeeper had muttered mysteriously. "Just in case." So Aloan found herself assigned to kitchen duty for the reception, helping coordinate the meal service for 300 guests. She worked quietly in her simple black uniform, invisible to the celebrating crowd but essential to the event's success. Cullen, meanwhile, was going through the motions of preparation with increasing dread. His groomsmen, college friends who barely knew him anymore, and business associates selected more for their social standing than their friendship, kept making jokes about the end of freedom and getting the old ball and chain. "You're a lucky man, Cullen," said Richard Hartwell, his best man by default rather than choice. "Sable's absolutely gorgeous. The kind of woman who makes other men hate you just for being with her." "Right?" Cullen replied automatically, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. "Lucky." But as he looked at himself in the mirror of the estate's groom preparation room, all he could think about was a conversation from 2 days ago, overheard in a laundry room, and a woman whose quiet dignity had shown him what real beauty looked like. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock, allowing for perfect golden hour photographs and a sunset reception. As the time approached, guests took their seats in the garden, creating a sea of elegant pastels and sophisticated neutrals. At 3:45, the string quartet began playing gentle background music. At 3:55, Cullen and his groomsmen took their positions at the altar, a beautiful archway of white flowers framing the sunset view. At exactly 4 o'clock, the wedding march began. Sable's entrance was everything she had dreamed it would be, a moment of pure theater that left the entire audience breathless with admiration. She looked like a goddess descending from heaven, her dress catching the light with every step, her smile radiant with triumph. But as she walked down that aisle, her eyes weren't on her groom. They were scanning the crowd, absorbing the awe and envy she had worked so hard to create. This was her moment of absolute victory, her public claiming of the ultimate prize. Cullen watched her approach and felt nothing but a deep, hollow sadness. She was beautiful, poised, and everything the world expected him to want. But she wasn't what his heart needed. The ceremony proceeded traditionally until they reached the exchange of vows. The officiant, a dignified elderly minister who had married 3 generations of Beverly Hills society, began the familiar words. Do you, Cullen James Westbrook, take Sable Catherine Pennington to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer, for better or for worse, till death do you part? This was the moment, the point of no return. Cullen opened his mouth to say the words that would seal his fate forever. And at that exact moment, Sable made her fatal mistake. She had spotted Aloan in the kitchen service area, barely visible through the window but unmistakably present despite having been fired. The sight of the maid at her wedding, her moment of absolute triumph, triggered a rage so intense that she completely forgot where she was. "What is that girl doing here?" she hissed, loud enough for the first few rows of guests to hear. The officiant paused, confused by the interruption. Several guests turned to see what had caught the bride's attention. But Sable was beyond caring about appearances now. 3 months of watching Cullen pay attention to a servant, weeks of feeling her control slip away, and the stress of maintaining her perfect image had finally pushed her past her breaking point. "I specifically fired that little nobody," her voice rose, carrying clearly across the garden. "How dare she show her face at my wedding?" The murmur that ran through the crowd was audible. 300 guests suddenly found themselves witnessing something far more dramatic than they had expected. Aloan, visible through the service window, had frozen at the sound of her name. Every person in attendance was now looking at her. This unknown young woman in a simple uniform who had somehow become the center of attention at Beverly Hills' wedding of the year. "Sable," Cullen said quietly, trying to redirect her attention. "We're in the middle of—" "Don't you Sable me," she snapped, turning on him with fury. "You think I don't know what's been going on? You think I haven't noticed the way you look at her?" The wedding guests were now witnessing something unprecedented. A bride melting down at her own altar. Phones appeared discreetly as the society crowd realized they were about to witness something that would be talked about for decades. But Sable was far from finished. Pointing directly at Aloan, she raised her voice to ensure every person present could hear her next words. "Let me tell you all exactly what you're looking at," she announced with vicious satisfaction. "That pathetic little creature is nothing but a servant who got ideas above her station. A nobody from nowhere who thought she could charm her way into a life she'll never deserve." The cruelty in her voice was so raw, so deliberately designed to destroy, that even the most jaded socialites in attendance shifted uncomfortably in their seats. "She's exactly what she appears to be, hired help who needs to remember her place. And her place is not at my wedding, stealing attention from her betters." Every word was calculated to humiliate, to reduce Aloan to nothing more than an object of scorn in front of 300 of society's most influential people. And that was when Cullen Westbrook finally found his voice. "Stop." The single word cut through Sable's tirade like a blade. The entire garden fell silent. "Stop talking," he said again, his voice growing stronger. "Stop talking about her like that. Stop talking at all." He turned away from his bride and looked directly at Aloan, who stood frozen in the service window, her face pale but her dignity intact even in this moment of public humiliation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Cullen said, his voice carrying clearly across the garden, "I owe you all an apology. You came here expecting to witness a wedding, but instead you've seen something that should never happen. The deliberate cruelty of one human being toward another." He stepped away from the altar, away from Sable's shocked face, and walked toward the service area where Eloan stood. The woman my fiancé just humiliated has shown more grace, strength, and genuine kindness in the past 2 months than I've seen in years. She has endured treatment that would have broken most people, and she has done it with a dignity that puts us all to shame. The wedding guests sat in stunned silence as Cullen walked directly to where Eloan stood. 300 of society's elite watched as a billionaire groom abandoned his altar to approach a servant. Cullen. Sable's voice cracked like a whip across the garden. What do you think you're doing? Get back here this instant. But Cullen had reached Eloan now, and he was looking into her brown eyes with an expression that made everything clear to every person watching. Eloan Merrick, he said loud enough for everyone to hear, you came into my house with nothing but a worn bag and a heart full of hope. You've shown me what real strength looks like. You've shown me what genuine kindness means. You've shown me what love should be. Sable's face had gone white with rage and disbelief. You cannot be serious. You're going to throw away everything we've built for a maid. What have we built, Sable? Cullen asked, turning back to face her. What exactly have we created together besides a performance for other people? You've never loved me. You've loved the idea of being Mrs. Cullen Westbrook. You've loved the status, the money, the power. But you've never once loved me. The wedding guests were witnessing the most dramatic reversal in Beverly Hills social history. Several women were already texting frantically, ensuring that word of this scandal would spread across the city before the sun set. I am not going to spend my life watching you destroy good people for sport, Cullen continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. I am not going to become complicit in cruelty by staying silent. And I am not going to marry someone who thinks love means domination. He turned back to Eloan, who had remained perfectly still throughout this entire exchange, her face showing a mixture of shock, concern, and something that might have been hope. I know this is insane, he said to her, his voice gentler now. I know this is the worst possible timing and the most public way to say this. But somewhere between watching you endure the impossible and seeing you find beauty in simple things, I fell in love with you. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. Mrs. Catherine Sterling clutched her husband's arm. Judge Jonathan Pierce leaned forward in his chair. 300 people held their breath. Eloan, Cullen said, taking her hands in his, I know you came here to work, not to fall in love. I know this complicates everything for you. But I also know that what I feel for you is real in a way that nothing else in my life has ever been. Sable's composure finally cracked completely. You're humiliating me, she screamed. In front of everyone. How dare you make me look like a fool? You're doing that yourself, Cullen replied without turning around. You've been doing it for months with your cruelty and your pride. I just stopped pretending not to see it. He looked back at Eloan, whose eyes were filled with tears she was trying not to shed. I can't ask you to marry me right now, he said with a slight smile. That would be presumptuous even for a billionaire. But I can ask you this. Will you give me the chance to earn your love the right way? Will you let me show you what it means to be cherished instead of endured? The entire garden waited for her answer. Even the string quartet had stopped playing, caught up in the drama unfolding before them. Eloan looked at this man who had just destroyed his own wedding for her sake. She thought about her mother in the hospital, about her 7 siblings depending on her income, about the practical impossibility of what he was suggesting. Then she thought about the loneliness she had seen in his eyes during their conversations, about the way he had defended her when no one else would, about the genuine kindness she had glimpsed beneath his wealthy exterior. Mr. Westbrook, she said quietly, her voice somehow carrying across the silent garden, I came here to work and I've tried very hard not to hope for anything more. But if you're asking whether I could love a man who values kindness over status, who chooses compassion over convenience, then yes. I believe I already do. The collective sigh that went up from the wedding guests sounded like wind through the trees. Several women were openly crying now, caught up in the romance of the moment despite its scandalous nature. Cullen smiled then, the first completely genuine smile anyone had seen from him in months. In that case, he said, raising his voice so everyone could hear, I have an announcement to make. He turned to face the assembled crowd, still holding Eloan's hands. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the confusion, but there's going to be a change in today's ceremony. Miss Sable Pennington is no longer welcome at this celebration, and she will not be becoming my wife. Two security guards who had been stationed discreetly around the estate began moving toward the altar area. However, Cullen continued, his voice filled with joy now, I would like you all to meet the woman who has captured my heart completely, Miss Eloan Merrick. She is everything I never knew I was looking for, and if she'll have me, she's going to be my wife. Sable's scream of rage could probably be heard 3 estates away. You cannot do this to me. I will destroy you. I will destroy both of you. My father will. Your father will what? Cullen interrupted calmly. Sue me for breach of promise? I'm worth $12 billion, Sable. I can afford the best lawyers in the country. What I can't afford is a lifetime of your cruelty. The security guards reached Sable as she lunged toward Eloan, her beautiful face twisted with fury. They caught her arms gently but firmly. Miss Pennington, the head guard said professionally, I'm going to need you to come with us. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? Yes, ma'am. You're the person Mr. Westbrook has asked us to escort from the premises. As the guards led Sable away, her screams and threats echoing across the garden, something magical happened among the wedding guests. Instead of the scandal and disapproval Cullen might have expected, he saw something else entirely. Mrs. Sterling was applauding. Judge Pierce was nodding approvingly. Richard Hartwell, his supposed best man, was grinning and shaking his head in amazement. Well, called out Thomas Chin, a tech entrepreneur Cullen barely knew, that's the most honest thing I've seen at a wedding in 20 years. Laughter rippled through the crowd, not mocking laughter, but the warm appreciation of people who had just witnessed something genuinely authentic in a world full of performance. Mrs. Foster appeared at Eloan's side, tears streaming down her face, and pressed a small velvet box into her hands. What's this? Eloan asked. Mr. Cullen asked me to hold on to it, the housekeeper said with a smile. Just in case he ever found someone worth giving it to. Cullen opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant diamond ring. Nothing like the ostentatious rock Sable had demanded, but perfect in its classic beauty. Eloan Merrick, he said, dropping to one knee right there in front of 300 people. Will you marry me? Not for status or money or because it makes sense on paper, but because I love you with everything I am. The garden fell silent again, waiting for her answer. Eloan looked down at this man kneeling before her, at the ring that represented not obligation but choice, at the crowd of people who had somehow become witnesses to the most important moment of her life. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I'll marry you. The cheer that went up from the wedding guests was spontaneous and joyful. Even the musicians began playing again, switching from the traditional wedding march to something celebratory and bright. Judge Pierce stood up from his seat and called out, Well, since I'm already here and licensed to perform ceremonies in California, should we make this official? What followed was unlike any wedding Beverly Hills had ever seen. Eloan stood before the altar in her simple black uniform, no veil, no elaborate dress, no months of preparation. But when Cullen slipped that ring onto her finger and kissed her as his wife, it was the most beautiful wedding anyone present had ever witnessed. The reception that followed was impromptu and perfect. The catering staff, led by a beaming Mrs. Foster, served the meal that had been prepared for Sable's wedding. The photographer, caught up in the romance of the moment, stayed to document what he later called the most authentic love story I've ever captured. But the most magical moment came near the end of the evening, when Cullen and Eloan had their first dance as husband and wife. She was still in her maid's uniform, he was still in his wedding tux, and they swayed together in the garden as their unlikely wedding guests looked on with approval. "Any regrets?" Cullen asked as they danced. "About marrying you?" Eloan smiled up at him. "None." "About doing it in front of 300 strangers while wearing a work uniform? Ask me tomorrow." He laughed and spun her around, both of them giddy with the impossibility of their happiness. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, many stopped to congratulate the unlikely couple. The general consensus seemed to be that they had witnessed something special, a reminder that real love was about choosing each other, not about meeting other people's expectations. Mrs. Sterling, the banker's wife who had complimented Eloan's service weeks earlier, was one of the last to leave. "My dear," she said to Eloan, "I've attended over 100 weddings in my lifetime, but I've never seen two people more clearly meant for each other. That young man is lucky to have found you." "I think we're both lucky," Eloan replied softly. "No, dear. Lucky is winning the lottery. What you two have is much rarer than that." As the guests departed and the staff cleaned up, Cullen and Eloan found themselves alone in the garden where their love story had reached its impossible conclusion. "So," Cullen said, taking her hand, "ready to start our real life together?" "I've been ready since the day you first noticed me," Eloan admitted. "I just never let myself believe it could actually happen." "Believe it," he said, kissing her gently. "We're going to build something beautiful together. Something real." As the guards led the disgraced bride away, whispers swept through the hall. What had begun as a spectacle of wealth had turned into a lesson no guest would forget. The maid who once entered the mansion with nothing but a nylon bag now stood honored before all, chosen not for beauty or status, but for the strength of her heart. In the end, kindness silenced cruelty, and love proved itself stronger than pride. 6 months later, Eloan's mother received the kidney transplant that saved her life, funded by her new son-in-law who insisted it was simply taking care of family. Her 7 siblings were enrolled in the best schools in California, their future secured by a man who understood that love meant caring for the people your spouse loved. Sable Pennington's threats never materialized into anything more than social media rants that eventually faded into irrelevance. Her father, a wise businessman, chose to maintain his profitable relationship with Cullen's company rather than support his daughter's vendetta. The Westbrook estate was transformed from a mansion of fear into a home filled with laughter. Eloan kept working, not as a maid, but as Cullen's partner in the charitable foundation they established together, focused on helping families in situations like her own had been. Mrs. Foster was promoted to estate manager, and she delighted in telling new staff members about the day love conquered cruelty, whenever they complained about their work being too difficult. And Cullen Westbrook, who had once been engaged to a woman who valued beauty over substance, learned that true happiness came from choosing someone who made you want to be worthy of their love. The story of the maid who married the billionaire became legend in Beverly Hills, not because it was a fairy tale, but because it was proof that real love still existed in a world that had almost forgotten what it looked like. If this story moved you, touched your heart, or made you believe in the power of true love over superficial beauty, please hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment when someone chose love over expectation? When kindness defeated cruelty? Share your story with our community, because real love stories like Eloan and Cullen's remind us all that the most beautiful endings often come from the most unexpected beginnings.